G'day, Tragic here, and welcome to my final thoughts for Android. Interesting. Yep, there's no infiltration, there's no netrunner, there's no book title. This is the original game, the game that started the entire world. And, it's interesting we should talk about that because that's what this game is. It's a world-building game. This is a game that is steeped in theme. It's steeped in concept. But at the same time, there's some real thematic inconsistencies in this game. So inconsistent in some ways that it has completely turned players off the game. This is a clunky game. This is what I call a gamer's game. This is the kind of game that a gamer has gone, I want a game that does this, and I wish it would do that. And, they've just chucked everything into it to try and force it to behave the way they want. And that's created in this particular case is a very clunky game with a lot of mechanisms that are completely superfluous. I mean, they sound great on paper, they sound great thematically, but when you're playing the game, you're like, this is ridiculous. I'm never going to use this. Why would I ever do this? The warrant's ridiculous. Some of the aspects of, especially in smaller games, when you don't have as many players, like the conspiracy board can sometimes not even be used. I don't know. It's an unusual game for many reasons. And one of the reasons is that I think that there's basically two different types of thematic gaming in board games that I know of, right? And one of them is theme through mechanisms, and one of them is theme through style and art and backstory, okay? Like, for example, a good example of a game that has thematic mechanisms would be Robinson Crusoe. In Robinson Crusoe, if you want to help another player, like say a player wants to cut down a tree, make wood, he puts his token on the place and that symbolizes him spending time cutting wood, okay? That's thematic, in itself, through the mechanisms. You put your token, you spend your time and your turn to cut wood, you cut wood. But in that game, if you want to help someone, you actually take your token and put it on top of their token. So you've got two tokens in the same location and you cut wood faster. The co-op theme of me helping my friend cut wood, we both go to the place to cut wood together. That's a thematic mechanism inside the game where the mechanism itself tells the story. But there are other games, like for example, Lord of the Rings, the LCG, where the mechanisms of the game aren't thematic, they're actually abstract, yet the theme is extremely strong because of the setting. We've got all the characters we know, we've got individual cards are thematic to the characters that they're attached to, things like that. But the actual core mechanics of the game, the tapping and the, where's the money coming? What are these resources? That theme isn't thematic. I mean, those mechanisms aren't thematic because they're abstracted. That doesn't mean Lord of the Rings isn't thematic, and that doesn't mean that Robinson Crusoe hasn't got some abstraction in it. But I think when you boil down the types of games around, that there are two types of themes. You have theme through setting and theme through mechanisms. A good game, like the top games, would probably have both. This game, though, is theme through setting, massively theme through setting. In fact, unlike most games, the mechanisms are actually completely at odds with the game. For example, the obvious example is in this game, you're trying to uncover this plot, who is the killer, right? And your investigator is investigating a crime. Yet you're not actually doing that mechanically. Mechanically, you're framing someone. You're getting evidence and you're placing it on people to prove their guilt. You're not getting evidence that is actually caused by them. You know what I mean? You're not discovering evidence. You're actually hiding it on the board. All sorts of weird little things where the mechanisms are just designed to keep the engine of the game running, but they're not exactly thematic. And that causes a lot of problems for a lot of people. So much so that there's actually a really popular variant of this game called Android the Director's Cut. You can find it in the Board Game Geek files section, and it's almost a redesign of the entire game to keep the theme and to make the mechanisms of the gameplay more in tune with the theme. Personally, I don't particularly like it. I like it the way it is. I don't have a problem with the engine of the game running the way it does. You know what I mean? Still, it is a real problem for some people. But even so, and I mean, there's a lot of storytelling games, but one of the things that makes this game so unique is that, well, basically, Kevin Wilson, the guy who designed it, he's an RPG designer, like from way back in the 90s. You know, I think he actually invented L5R or something. Anyway, Legends of the Five Rings. Anyway, whatever. He's an RPG designer, and the RPG aspect of this game is incredibly strong. But because of that, what's so bizarre about this game is that it's basically a victory point race, okay? You're here to earn victory points to win. But winning the game is not what the characters are focused on. The characters you play are actually focused on a completely different aspect of the game to winning. The characters are focused on experiencing their life, experiencing their stories, their plot cards. It doesn't matter to Caprice if she discovers the serial killer, if she falls in, you know, her falling in love with her boyfriend at the university and discovering that she's actually human has nothing to do with the murder. It's completely separate. In fact, sometimes it's at odds. Sometimes to get the story to resolve in a thematic role-playing type way, you actually have to tank your chances to win the game. Very, very bizarre. And I think that's what makes this game so unique. You know, that, and it's also quite vicious. I mean, this is a vicious game. The card mechanics of, you know, you cast light cards to make yourself happy, but that actually sends you into darkness, which is on your board, makes you sad. So making yourself happy makes you sad. That's another mechanical problem. But to go back into the light so you can cast more light cards, you have to cast these terrible setback cards on your opponents. And this can be quite vicious. I mean, it can be really, you know, whack-a-mole kind of thing, setback after setback. It can be very frustrating, and a lot of people don't like that. Personally, I don't have a problem with that, but I can see where people are coming from. This is what I would state, this is on the nastier side of gaming. You know, this isn't a game where you're outwitting people. This is a game where they're making plans and you're playing a card and going, oh, actually, you can't do that. Suck it. You know, and that can be quite frustrating for people. But, you know, speaking about the cards, and this is back to the way the game is so topsy-turvy, is that the cards themselves are so thematic with the story. I mean, this game, the story oozes out of this game like no other, like even more so than, you know, things like Arkham Horror, which are famous for that. And like, for example, you have a plot card, right? And if you remember from the playthrough, you have keywords on the plot, which means that when your opponent plays cards that match your plot, they get bonuses in hurting you and also in their card management, okay? So that makes it much more valuable for them to play plot cards that match your plot than plot cards that don't match your plot, right? So the ones that don't match, they discard to fuel their costing system, and the ones that do match, they actually play on you. And what's interesting is the ones that they play tell the story. It's actually the cards that your opponents play on you that drives the story, drives the narrative of the character, which is of course separate to the actual way you win the game. In fact, because they're coming from the players, they're usually retarding you. It's so interesting, and it's cruel in a way, but it's unique. And you know, like when people play this game well enough and they're playing the correct cards versus the correct plots, and every card that is coming out is about different aspects in their lives, it's really, really good. You know, and you notice that I'm talking about a lot of co-op games when I'm talking about this game. And that's because this is in some ways a co-op game. I mean, we're in competition for VPs, but we're not in direct competition with each other. We're actually, in a way, working together. We're all working the same case. We can't physically attack each other, so to speak. But you say, what about all these dark cards that you can play on each other to like set each other back? Well, again, this is another mechanical separation between the theme and what you're doing. The casting of the cards is a mechanism designed to drive the engine of the game, as I've been saying. You know, that's the way I've been describing it in this video, to drive the engine. But you're not actually attacking your other players. You're not actually casting things on them from your character. You're casting them on from a kind of omnipotent, position above the narrative. Because when you read the cards, they're just events that happen in their lives as they experience their personal journeys. So what it is, it's like in Arkham Horror, right? You flip a card when you go to the Twilight Lodge and you get a little bit of story. In this, it's the same kind of thing, except the cards are coming from the other players through this dark light mechanism instead of you drawing from locations, a random location. But it's trying to produce the same result, as in the story is being told through cards as you progress. But the players are not thematically in competition with each other. Interesting. Very interesting, right? I mean, that's unusual. And this game is unusual. And I mean, it's not the kind of game we see nowadays, especially nowadays. I mean, games now, except for, there are exceptions, but most of the games now, they're getting shorter run times. They're getting tighter, more strict in the rules, like they're getting much more condensed and shorter and punchier rules that are making a lot more sense. And because gamers are a lot more sophisticated than they were, like even 15 years ago, whenever the hell this was made, I think it was made 2006. But this game is actually a sprawling beast. It's that old school kind of game. It's got every single rule in it. It's got this complicated mix of stuff that's going on, and the game is long and it's clunky. And in that lies its brilliance. I don't think a game like this, I don't know of a game even remotely like this. And I don't know of a game, I doubt that we're ever going to see another game designed like this, because not only has that type of game kind of gone out of favor a little, the mechanisms of this game would never be designed in this way again, because people are so much more focused on mechanisms as a way of describing theme, while this game is not focused on that at all. I don't know. Would I recommend this game to you? Well, if you've got the right group, then absolutely yes. If you've got a group that is comfortable with role-playing, comfortable with getting into the spirit of what this game is doing, then yeah, this is a fantastic game. If you have hyper-competitive players, no, this isn't really the game for them. Like I said, it's got more in common with co-ops than not. And with the setback mechanic, that can be very frustrating for some people. And then you have like the thematic inconsistencies. Some people will be like, they just can't get past, putting the framing people thing. They just can't. I've played with people who just cannot get past that as a problem concept. But if you have the right group of people who read out every card, like the entire card every time they play a card, people who talk in their character's name, who get into the role-playing aspects of this game, which is really the most interesting part of this game, then this game is like no other. I highly recommend this game, and that's about it. This is a freaking good game. FFG, one of the original games from their catalog, and still, in my opinion, one of their underrated classics.